Hello and welcome back to another episode. Now, today I'm going to be talking about
Resident Evil.
yes, the granddaddy of survival horror, at the very least for most people, the beginnings of what we now call the modern survival horror genre. In the 1990s, survival horror came crashing into people's lives, this bloody infected zombie oozy mess, and people have loved it ever since. They've scarcely looked back. Unfortunately, neither has Capcom, but we'll come to that in a moment. Well, my experience of Resident Evil didn't actually begin with the first game. I was a little bit too young for it, really, and by that I don't mean that in a sort of a, oh, I just couldn't handle the blood and the grime. No, it's more about the fact that I don't think I would have understood the pacing of the first game, the ammo conservation, the tension of the first game. I wouldn't have understood or appreciated it, and therefore would have got really frustrated with it and possibly not bothered. There's also another good reason why I didn't play it, and that's because I didn't have a PlayStation. Kind of need a PlayStation to play the first Resident Evil when it first came out, at least. So my real experience actually didn't quite begin with Resident Evil 2. It began with this. It began with this copy of the Sega Saturn magazine. Now, I didn't actually have a Sega Saturn, but I was interested in what was coming on these sort of next generation consoles, and therefore I picked up different games magazines. This one was from 1997, and on the front you've got Sonic R exclusive, senses-shattering racing with Sega's Megastar. Sega Touring Car is quite a good article. And also an exclusive first look at Resident Evil, Mammoth Guide to the Capcom Classic, which was being ported to the Sega Saturn. That's why I got this magazine, was for Resident Evil. Now, the article inside is a brilliant article. It talks about, essentially it's an introduction to the game, but also it's actually trying to convince people why they should come late to the party, as it were, why they need the Saturn version of the game as opposed to the PlayStation. It was going to be slightly better graphics, and that's more or less part of what this article was for. It was to make the case. But it explained Resident Evil. It took you through, for example, different screenshots from the game. It talked about the different characters, the setting, the achievements which the first game had been, and also as well, this article was stuffed with concept art as well. So you got a sense actually of what the designers were thinking when they put together the game itself. And obviously, at that point, sometimes concept art and the sprites which came up on screen, the polygons at this point, I suppose, the polygons weren't quite matching up, but the idea behind them is really good to see, the idea behind their vision. But it wasn't really until 1999, so a couple of years later, that I actually got to play a Resident Evil game. That's when Resident Evil 2 came to the Nintendo 64. That was my console I had at that point. And it was a really, really good port. In fact, it was critically acclaimed because it had some extras, like extra costumes, slightly improved graphics, and the fact that it was all on one cartridge, not on a disc, for example, was remarkable. I believe it was the biggest, in terms of content, the biggest cartridge produced for the N64. So people were going, that's astonishing. And that's when I got to play it. So I put it in, and I let myself just I let it wash over me, as it were, the Resident Evil universe. And after a short sort of introduction as to what's happened in the previous game, which I didn't really want to watch because I wanted to play the previous game at some point, so I tried to skip that. And then you get the sort of the introduction video to this game. You get Leon S. Kennedy and Claire Redfield arriving in Raccoon City. It's pitched perfectly. The music, the atmosphere, the eerily empty streets, but even though the electricity is on, there's no sign of anyone really on the streets. You instantly go, there's something wrong here. And pretty quickly, both characters find out there is something very wrong in Raccoon City. Leon actually ends up sort of saving-ish Claire from a zombie, shoots him in the head. He's sort of behind her. He says, "Get down!" and shoots the zombie. And that's not to say that Claire needs rescuing all the time. She's actually a very strong, independent female character, which is a really good thing, actually, especially at this point in computer games. But he does. They're introduced to each other. They dive into a car. There's zombies everywhere. They're freaking out. They're driving along. Suddenly, a truck driver who you've seen who has been bitten, he's been zombified, and his truck, full of petrol presumably, crashes into them, forcing them to dive out of the car in different directions. Massive explosion, and then suddenly you're in charge. Oh, okay. You've got the controller and you need to try and get away from that crash site. There's flames everywhere. You're either Claire or you're Leon, and there are zombies staggering and staggering at you, and you're in. And from that point on, suddenly it really felt that you're in Raccoon City, and it's just going to hell. Everything's falling apart. The undead are everywhere. Very limited ammo. That's something you learn very quickly. Maybe a box in the back of a van or something. You've got lots of obstacles, climbing over bins, going through abandoned buses, and finally you make your way to the police station. That's where Leon and Claire agree to meet up at the police station, and you go in, and that's really, for me, that's when the game really starts, because it feels as though, not that you're in a police station, it actually feels as though you're in a mansion. And there's a reason for this, and there was a complete redesign of the game. I think Resident Evil 1.5 was set much more in an actual, what you would think of as being a modern police station, or at the very least, at that point, a modern police station. But they redesigned it to make it feel like a mansion, because they wanted people to link it with the first game. They wanted that experience to continue and to be expanded on. And it's pitched perfectly. The music is so atmospheric. It's not really music so much as a collection of sounds. It's almost like Hans Zimmer kind of score in that sense. You get the sort of the build of sounds and emotions, and the old ding dong sort of twinkle on the piano, which gives you the genuine sense that something's happened in this building. You can't see anyone around, but there might be something around any corner. Really, for me, the sort of the horror of the situation really hit home when you go into this corridor. And because of the fixed camera positions, you get this this one shot, which I think is a beautiful idea, is that you get the camera for the game, which is outside the building, looking in through the window at Leon coming into the corridor, and it feels voyeuristic. You're going, well, who's out there? Who's looking at me? What the hell's going on here? And just when you've been made uneasy by that, you continue along the corridor. The camera comes back into the corridor, and then suddenly you see this guy on the ceiling. You see a licker. Now, there's a reason why I've got him. It's because I've got the two guys here, Leon and the licker, and for me these guys really are the epitome of what hooked me on Resident Evil. That moment when these two characters meet, the licker's on the ceiling, Leon's in the corridor, and you feel completely vulnerable. This horrendous creature lands in front of you, and you've got to try and take it out. You're thrust into being in control, and you're freaking out, you're panicking, you know you haven't got all that much in terms of weaponry. Somehow you just about managed to survive, although probably the first time I tried it I didn't survive. And your heart rate's going. That was Resident Evil. There's not dozens of them, you haven't got a massive gun, it's you, limited weaponry, and this thing on the ceiling. And that's really what hooked me into Resident Evil 2. Now, there's that, and there's also a point in the police station which I think, again, pictures it perfectly. Throughout your journey through the police station, you sort of realise that stuff has been happening. The police station has been under siege, essentially. They've boarded up the windows, they've had sort of last stand plans. The SWAT team, I think, had a briefing room where it was quite clear that I think there's a diary in there somewhere that sort of outlines just how problematic things have been. And you're going along this corridor, you go through it several times, all's good, you're walking past these boarded up windows, and then suddenly, poof, they get you, they're crashing through the window, these zombies are. That made me jump. I was terrified by that. I was, oh! Drop the controller. And it's those sort of moments with Resident Evil that make they're horrific, and they make you jump, they scare you, but that's the reason why you come back to the game. That's what you want. You want to be lulled into that false sense of security, and then suddenly it gets you, it snaps. Now, of course, the weirdness about Resident Evil is that to build in the tension, to build in the puzzles, all this kind of thing, has to be not quite realistic. And the police station, I imagine, would be a really strange place to work. You have to sort of, in order to get keys to open doors, you have to move bookshelves. You have to get at one point I think there's some chess piece plugs you have to get to sort of plug into a electric sort of circuit board. It's not at all realistic, and if I worked there, I'd be sort of saying to the chief of police, why do I have to move these bookshelves to match up with that painting to get the key to get into the office to work here? What's going on? That said, though, by the sounds of it, the police chief, who won't go into it, but he had problems of his own, and you probably wouldn't want to challenge him on this stuff. There's certainly something wrong with him. But bit by bit, things get worse. You find yourself deeper and deeper into the story. You're no longer in the police station. You sort of make your way into the sewer system and beyond. And again, I won't ruin the game or ruin the story. If you haven't played it, just play it. But it works. The whole game as an experience, and it is an experience, works perfectly. You're suckered in, you are hooked. You're being harangued and harassed and terrified at every step, and it's beautiful. It's a brilliant game. I mean, for example, at one point there's a police helicopter which is crashed into the building, and it's sort of, you can see it burning. sort of I'm not quite sure, I don't know if a zombie does come out of it, but you get the sense that someone could come flopping out at any moment. It's a bit of it is quite clear that things are getting worse and worse. Not to mention, actually, as well, the fact that there's a little girl who you do eventually bump into, but for a long time she's just running away from you. You sort of see her at the end of corridors, disappearing, and that, for me, that's always been kind of my thing. That's been the thing that will, for example, if I was in Raccoon City and there was a little girl in a sailor costume, that Japanese sort of schoolgirl's outfit, just in front of a toy shop, the whole city's gone to hell, but she's sort of there going, "Help me, mister," I would shotgun her in the face so quickly, because clearly she's wrong. There's something wrong with that, and that's kind of like the stuff of nightmares, certainly for me. And so having this little girl disappear around corners all the time, again, that was just, I was getting more and more freaked out, more and more scared, and more loving this game. It was brilliant, and I'm not even actually that big a horror movie fan. I don't just love being scared, I love being scared in a brilliant context, and in this instance, Resident Evil 2 is it. Oh, there's the tyrant, this horrible, like 8-foot tall killing machine who's been sent, and eventually comes crashing through walls, chasing you around the building. And again, it just adds to that sense of anything could happen at any moment. I mean, there's one instance where you think you've done what you needed to do. You go and get this thing from a room, you come out of the room, come down a corridor, you've already been down that corridor before, and just like with the zombies, gets you. This guy, whoosh, comes crashing through the wall. There's no real point in trying to fight him, you just need to run away, and he's coming after you. It is brilliant. Resident Evil 2 is the way a Resident Evil game should, in fact, be. And it's something which actually the later Resident Evil games seem to lose. I mean, really, Resident Evil 4 is the last game that I truly enjoyed. Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil 6 just haven't had that, and it's a real shame. And for example, with the climax of Resident Evil 2, it kind of feels like you're escaping from the ship in Alien. You know, they've got the lights going off, and the steam, and the countdown from a computer voice, this sort of female computer counting down to an explosion, and this kind of thing. It had everything, Resident Evil 2, and sadly the later games just don't seem to have that. Now, in 2002, the GameCube was released in Europe, and with it came finally Resident Evil, the first game. I had an opportunity to play the remake of Resident Evil. I won't talk about that now, I'll talk about that in a later video, but this kind of confirmed to me that I was on the right track with Resident Evil, and I really should keep on trying to play these games. And I have to say, I got really quite badly into it. For example, I printed off a timeline, Resident Evil timeline, so I could understand more about how all these games fit together. It's lots of pages. This was back when I was in high school. I made myself a STARS ID. That was not in high school. That was a bit more recently than that. I've just been in love with this world ever since I played Resident Evil 2. So if you haven't played it, definitely give it a go. It's well worth trying out, and frankly it will give you a sense as to why it is that so many people are so frustrated with Resident Evil 5, Resident Evil 6 and possibly Resident Evil 7. What we want is horror, survival horror, not action horror, not action adventure. And Resident Evil 2, for me, is the pinnacle of the Resident Evil games. Maybe there's been a bit of a plateau with, with Resident Evil 3 and also Resident Evil, Code Veronica X, where's that one? I have got that one as well. And also Resident Evil 4. But it's sort of gone downhill recently because they've lost some of what made Resident Evil. And so hopefully, with the recently announced reissue of the first Resident Evil game coming to consoles that are currently available, more people will actually be able to understand why Resident Evil is popular. It's not a Michael Bay fest. It's got more to it than that. Anyway, as ever, hopefully you've enjoyed this video, and until next time, do take care. Bye bye.